What's up guys, Brandon Washington here, and in today's video we're going to be taking a look at two amazing film cameras, the Sony A7S Mark II and the Canon 1DX Mark II, and we're going to be figuring out how close the Sony can compare to the Canon. What's up guys, thank you first of all so much for checking out the video. If you're new to the channel, you might want to consider hitting that subscribe button, because if you're into filmmaking, gear, photography, all that cool stuff, tips, tricks, tutorials, this is the perfect channel for you. And so make sure you hit that subscribe button. But like I said, in this video, we are going to be comparing the Canon 1DX Mark II to the Sony A7S Mark II. Now, I already know that when it comes to photography, these two cameras are not even in the same ballpark. They're not actually designed to be competitors. However, when it comes to video, these are two cameras that I have personally been kind of going back and forth between, and I have a lot of you guys, whether that's through Instagram or through YouTube, leaving me comments and questions, asking me which one do I think is best. So this video here is to actually put these two to the test when it comes to video. Now, a couple quick little disclaimers. First things first, I have been a Canon shooter for a very long time. I've been shooting on Canon for about the last 7 years, and so because of this, I kind of have a little bit of a bias when it comes to Canon. Now, I'm saying that completely up front, knowing now that I've actually already done the review that Sony definitely blew me away when it came to how these two cameras stacked up. So I just want to get all that out of the way, get that all cleared up before we jump into it. But now, without further ado, let's go ahead and figure out which of these two cameras I think was best. All right, so when it came to these cameras, I pretty much tried to do this test in three main areas. I looked at the low light, which of course everyone raves about the Sony's low light. I also wanted to look at picture profiles or coloring of the image, so the quality, what it actually looks like. And then third, I wanted to look at the slow motion options of both of these. Now, these are three things that are very important to me as a shooter, and I know it's going to be important to some of you guys as filmmakers. So these are the three things that I wanted to primarily focus on. So first, let's start with low light. Now, when it comes to low light, obviously Sony has been known as the king of low light with the A7S Mark II, and with the extremely high ISO ranges, this was not really so much of a surprise to me that the Sony did very well. In order to actually get the most out of the Sony, from you guys' recommendation, I shot the Sony completely in S-Log2, so that way I could really see what that full dynamic range would look like coming out of the Sony. Now, when you're shooting with the Sony in S-Log, your minimum as far as your ISO can go is 1600. Now, when it comes to low light, this is perfectly fine, and this actually worked really well for this situation. However, later on, you'll see why this really wasn't the best thing when it comes to shooting during the daytime. But even with this high ISO of 1600 and being able to use the magical Sony for low light, when it came to shooting a subject, I just wasn't really impressed. I feel like even though this camera is really good at low light, the way it handled the skin tones in low light just wasn't very good. I look at that next to my Canon 1DX Mark II, and even though my Canon is not gonna perform as well in low light, I feel like it did a much better job handling skin tones in these low light situations. On top of that, there's just a certain look where you can kind of look at these LED lights side by side, and you can see with the Sony, it just doesn't handle the highlights as well. Now, I'm not sure if that has to do with, you know, trying to get in more as far as that dynamic range goes, because I was shooting flat, but overall, I just wasn't really impressed with the way the Sony looked after I went ahead and graded it and put it side by side next to the Canon. So what's my final verdict as far as low light? Well, yes, the Sony absolutely does a phenomenal job with low light, but I think it only works well when you're not using a subject. Now, obviously, low light is never the ideal situation. You want to try to expose your image properly using natural light or using artificial light, but in a pinch, if you had to go low light, Sony's gonna get the job done. But if I had to choose between the two, and I'm shooting a subject, I would go with my Canon all day. All right, so the next part of this test is gonna be just looking at the color picture profiles. Now, everybody has already been ranting and raving about how great Canon's color science is, and quite honestly, that has been the #1 driving factor behind why I have always used Canon. I've always liked the way they look straight out of camera. I've never had to do too much processing, but in this situation, I wanted to put the two side by side to get the most out of each. So again, with the Sony, I shot everything in S-Log2, and then I also used Pro mode as far as my color picture profile. And then when it came to the Canon, I actually went ahead and downloaded a log-like profile for my Canon 1DX Mark II. The nice thing about this was this allowed me to have both images start at a completely flat use. This meant that all of the detail was baked into the image and that it was gonna be on me to grade them to get the most out of them. This way I felt like I could give Sony the best run for its money with the Canon. This is where the Sony completely blew me away. Being able to grade S-Log2 from using natural sunlight, it actually did a phenomenal job and hung in there really well with the Canon. Honestly, looking at these two side by side, I really got confused as far as which was shot with which. There's a slight difference in like some of the colors with Canon, obviously. Canon seems to have a little bit richer colors and you can see more of a dynamic within the colors. But quite honestly, only because I had them side by side would I have been able to tell. Sony blew me away. And what I kind of learned is if you can kind of just learn to work with S-Log2 and figure out the right profile for yourself with the Sony, it actually does a really, really good job. And so in this area where I believed that the Canon was gonna completely blow the Sony out of the water when it came to color and quality, honestly, I had to give it a tie. I think the Sony did a phenomenal job. And I was just completely blown away. I can't believe it. So far, I've actually been more liking the Canon in the low light, which I thought I would like the Sony. And when it comes to quality and color, I thought the Canon was gonna destroy the Sony, and that was actually a tie. So when it came down to slow motion, this was pretty much going to kind of help me seal the deal as far as which camera I thought was best. And again, the Sony blew me away. The Sony is a phenomenal camera when it comes to slow motion. Now, the biggest problem I have with the Sony is where, yes, it can shoot in 1080p at up to 120 frames per second. It is a significant crop in on that full frame sensor, even more of a crop than what you'll see on the 1DX. I was not really excited about this because this means that if you are gonna try to shoot any type of slow motion, you're either gonna have to take 3 or 4 steps way back, or you're gonna have to switch lenses in order to keep that same type of look. However, with that being said, the Sony still held on really strong when it came to the quality of the slow motion. I shoot a lot of 120 frames with my Canon and I absolutely love the way it looks. It's very smooth, very buttery smooth. And in this situation, we actually surprisingly got snow here in Houston, which we never get snow. And it was really cool to be able to capture some of those snow kind of falling with the Sony, and I thought it did a really good job. It held really well as far as color again, and as far as being able to shoot with the right shutter speed and everything like that. The Sony did a phenomenal job. Now, the only issue you run into when shooting slow motion with the Sony is once you switch over to shooting at 120 frames per second, now your S-Log minimum ISO is 3200. This is a very high ISO to be trying to shoot outside. So luckily I had my ND filter, my variable ND filter, to be able to cut down on a lot of that light. So a variable ND filter is an absolute must if you're gonna shoot slow motion with the Sony. But if you have that and you can make it work, it looks absolutely amazing. And so again, when I compare the Sony to the Canon, strictly there, it's another tie. So what are my final thoughts when it comes to the Canon versus the Sony? Well, honestly, I'm really torn. I find that the Sony has done a much better job than I thought it was ever gonna do. You know, the way that it handles color by shooting an S-Log, the way it handles slow motion was phenomenal. I actually wasn't very impressed with its low light capabilities. However, I don't really need low light as much as I think I do. I should probably just be making sure that I'm using proper lighting so I don't have to worry about that. But I wasn't really impressed with the Sony's low light, but overall, I was very surprised with how well the Sony actually did comparing it to the 1DX. Now, obviously, these are two totally different types of camera. The 1DX is designed as a phenomenal photography camera and a phenomenal video camera, and the Sony A7S II is primarily just a video camera. It is a mirrorless camera. Yes, you can take photos with it, but most people who pick it up are thinking about using it strictly for video. The other major differences between these two cameras is the price. Obviously, with the 1DX, you know, being anywhere from $5,000 to $6,000, and the Sony being anywhere from $2,500 to about $3,000. There's a massive price jump. I mean, you can almost get two Sony A7S IIs for the price of a 1DX. And so because of this, if someone is in the market and they are looking for a really good video camera around that $3,000 price point, the Sony is something I can feel comfortable actually recommending to them. You do have to kind of know how to work this camera. I mean, it does take some getting used to, being able to shoot an S-Log, knowing how to color grade properly. These are things that you are gonna have to know how to do if you do pick up the Sony A7S II. But for those people who don't know how to do those things, you can definitely check out LUTs. For example, with the Sony A7S II, I actually created some LUTs just for this camera, which I'll have links to down in the description. But the whole point of this is to be able to know how to use that camera to get the most out of it. And if you can figure that out, I really do believe that it will rival the Canon 1DX Mark II. Now, with as great as that camera is, I still don't see myself trading in my 1DX to be able to go to the Sony A7S II. There are just certain things about the 1DX that I just can't get over. Most of it having to do with the photography, but also having to do with the video. I mean, Canon still dominates when it comes to the dual pixel autofocus. It also is gonna just be completely, massively much better when it comes to battery life. That is one area where the Sony A7S II does not handle it so well. And so where I find that if you were just to buy one camera to kind of do everything you need, I still believe the 1DX Mark II is the better of the two cameras, but it's not truly a fair comparison comparing it up to the A7S II. But strictly when it comes to filmmaking and you're talking about budget and thinking about what you're getting for the price, I do believe that the Sony A7S II is a phenomenal camera. It is a great camera for the price, and especially with rumors of an A7S Mark III coming out, I'm very excited to continue to test out Sony cameras, and who knows, I might actually pick up one as a secondary camera or one to shoot YouTube videos just like this. So I guess my final thought when it comes to this camera is, first of all, there is no one perfect camera. Although I feel like I have bought one of the almost close to perfect cameras with the 1DX Mark II, there is no perfect camera. And I will say with each camera, there are still little things that could be improved on. But overall, I think the Sony is a great camera, and if you are in the market for around $3,000, I would definitely pick that camera up over, let's say, a 5D Mark IV from the Canon world, because when I look at those two side by side, it's not even close. I would go with the Sony, but overall, I still think that the 1DX Mark II is the best overall content creation camera, but the Sony comes in a very close second. So I hope this video has been helpful. I hope it answered any questions that you guys have about these two. I'm sure there are still tons more questions that you guys would have. So please leave those questions down in the comments down below, because I will make a follow-up video to answer any additional questions you guys have. Also, if you thought this video was helpful and you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button, because I make tons of videos just like this, all about filmmaking gear, tips, tutorials, tricks, and all those things. So any additional questions you might have, also leave those down in the comments, because you never know, that might be the topic of my next video. But with all this being said, thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.